Agatha Raisin and the secret Mrs. Bloxby did not tell. In the quiet heart of the Cotswolds, one secret has begun to unravel, and every whisper leads Agatha Raisin closer to danger. Settle in, mystery lover, and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Carsely awoke beneath a blue sky that looked almost dishonest. The hedgerows gleamed with dew, the thatched roof steamed faintly in the early warmth, and somewhere beyond the vicarage a wood pigeon cooed with smug satisfaction. Agatha Raisin, who mistrusted any morning described as perfect, opened her kitchen window and declared it too fine to last. Hodge, her sleek grey cat, blinked at her with the indifference of one who had already breakfasted. She spooned his food into the dish, feeling virtuous, and even splashed water onto the lone geranium on the sill. For 5 full seconds she basked in the glow of domestic competence, then grew restless. Nothing unsettled Agatha like peace. By 9:30, she was dressed in a smart navy skirt, a crisp blouse that promised more confidence than she felt, and heels entirely unsuited to village gravel. She told herself she would pop round to the vicarage just to see how dear Mrs. Bloxby is keeping. In truth, she longed for news, any news, preferably scandalous. The vicarage sat behind a privet hedge, all wisteria and good behaviour. Agatha rapped on the door, which opened almost immediately. Mrs. Bloxby stood there, smiling as ever, but something in the smile was wrong, fragile, distracted. "Agatha, how lovely! I was just about to make tea." "Splendid timing on my part," said Agatha, brushing past. "You always read my mind, Margaret." The vicar's wife led her through to the sunny kitchen. It smelled of lemon polish and moral rectitude. Agatha perched on a chair, noting that Mrs. Bloxby's usually neat hair was escaping its bun. "You're looking tired, dear. Trouble with the vicar's sermons again?" Mrs. Bloxby laughed too lightly. "Oh no, just parish business. We're planning a little charity event. The Women's Institute thought a good deeds auction might raise funds for the roof repair." "Good deeds," said Agatha. "What does that mean? Offering to iron someone's shirts for money?" "Something of the kind. People bid for small favours, gardening, baking, errands. It's all meant to bring the community together." Agatha sniffed. "Sounds like extortion with bunting." The vicar's wife smiled again, but her hands fussed unnecessarily with the teapot. "It wasn't my idea, actually. Someone outside the parish suggested it." "Oh?" Agatha leaned forward. "Who?" "Just an acquaintance. She's advising us on modern fundraising methods." There it was, the hesitation that set Agatha's internal alarm clanging. Mrs. Bloxby never hesitated. "You've gone all secretive," Agatha said, lighting a cigarette despite the open window. "I can tell. You always blink twice when you're hiding something." Mrs. Bloxby's tone grew mild but firm. "Nonsense. Sugar?" Agatha accepted both cubes, glaring through the smoke. The conversation drifted to safer topics, the vicar's sermon, Doris Simpson's new washing machine. But Mrs. Bloxby's laughter remained strained, and when Agatha left, she had the odd sense of being gently pushed out of the door. Walking home past the village green, Agatha scowled at the cheerful world. Even the ducks looked smug. She hated feeling excluded, especially by the one person whose calm she secretly admired. By lunchtime, she had smoked 2 extra cigarettes and phoned Roy Silver in London, ostensibly to discuss a PR leaflet. "Darling, you sound fractious," Roy drawled. "Has someone in tweed upset you again?" "Don't be daft. It's just Mrs. Bloxby being, well, mysterious." "Margaret? She couldn't be mysterious if you paid her." "Exactly why it's worrying." Roy chuckled. "Perhaps she's running a secret gambling ring for the clergy. Imagine the bingo stakes." Agatha laughed despite herself, then hung up feeling both foolish and more determined. That afternoon she ventured to the village shop under the pretence of buying biscuits. Carsely's shop was half grocer, half gossip exchange. The bell jangled as she entered, and Doris Simpson turned from the till, her apron covered in the day's chatter. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. You've just missed a stranger asking after Mrs. Bloxby." Agatha froze mid-aisle. "What stranger?" "Smart woman. London sort. Hair like she'd had it blown straight with money. Drove a black Saab, if you please." "Did she say who she was?" "Didn't need to. Paid for her milk with crisp 20s. Said she'd catch Mrs. Bloxby later at the hall." Doris lowered her voice. "London teeth she had. too white for honest living. Agatha bought the biscuits out of sheer distraction and walked home in thought. A London woman, a secretive vicar's wife, and a suspiciously well-funded charity auction. It smelled of trouble, and Agatha recognised the scent with something close to delight. Evening fell soft and pink over the village. From her window, Agatha watched Mrs. Bloxby cross the green, her figure small and neat against the fading light. She was carrying an envelope and looking about nervously before slipping into the church. Agatha's curiosity itched like a rash. She would have followed, but her conscience, such as it was, reminded her of past humiliations involving trespassing and ecclesiastical property. Instead, she poured a gin and tonic, lit another cigarette, and made a mental note to attend that ridiculous auction, front row. When the phone rang, she jumped. Bill Wong's calm voice greeted her. "Evening, Mrs. Raisin. Nothing criminal yet, I hope?" "Not yet, but give Carsely time," she said. "Tell me, Bill, you ever met anyone in the village with a black Saab?" "Can't say I have. Why?" "Just wondering. There's a stranger sniffing around the vicarage, probably selling holy water in bulk." "Leave it be, Agatha. Not every stranger's a suspect." "That's why crimes get solved by people like me," she retorted. He sighed. "Please, just stay out of trouble for a week. My paperwork could use the rest." "Boring policeman," she said fondly, and replaced the receiver. Later, as twilight deepened, Agatha stepped outside. The air smelled of damp earth and evening smoke. Across the road, a black car glided away from the vicarage drive, its headlights slicing the dusk. She caught only a glimpse of the driver, a woman's profile, sharp as glass. Agatha watched until the car disappeared round the bend toward Evesham. Somewhere behind the vicarage hedge came a faint murmur, perhaps Mrs. Bloxby on the telephone, or perhaps nothing at all. Hodge appeared at her ankles, mewing his reminder that civilization owed him supper. She picked him up, the cat purring like a tiny engine, and carried him inside. "Mark my words, Hodge," she muttered. "Something's brewing, and I intend to stir it." She set down his bowl, topped her glass, and looked once more toward the darkened vicarage windows. A perfect day, she thought, always ends with someone hiding something. By the following afternoon, a mild drizzle had settled in, the kind of weather that made people think charitable thoughts. Mild drizzle, weak sun, and the faint smell of damp sponge cake. Carsely was in one of its collective moods of self-congratulation, and the Women's Institute Hall gleamed with forced good cheer. Agatha stood at the entrance in her scarlet suit, balancing a handbag large enough to hold both her pride and her curiosity. The heels were too high for the village's uneven floorboards, but vanity triumphed, as it usually did. "You look magnificent, Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby, smiling with maternal indulgence. "Of course I do," Agatha replied. "The trouble is, everyone else looks like they've come to scrub the floors rather than raise funds." The hall smelled of flowers, sponge cake, and thinly disguised rivalry. Every table was covered in cheerful gingham cloths and stacked with cakes, jars, or homemade crafts. Mrs. Freddie Cross had gone overboard again, presenting 6 fruit loaves shaped like crowns. "She's showing off," muttered Agatha. "You'd think she was auditioning for Bake Off." "That's not for another decade, dear," Mrs. Bloxby murmured, eyes twinkling. Agatha surveyed the room. There was the vicar, radiating good intentions, Bill Wong doing his best to appear invisible among the women, and to Agatha's satisfaction, the return of the mysterious London woman, the one with the black Saab and the unnervingly white teeth. She was standing near the cake stall, dressed in a chic grey suit that looked absurdly sophisticated for Carsely. She was speaking softly to Mrs. Bloxby, who seemed both pleased and unsettled by the attention. Agatha felt the sting of curiosity as keenly as jealousy. Who was she? A donor? A journalist? Or worse, someone who knew something about Mrs. Bloxby's past? The vicar's wife excused herself quickly and moved to the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us for this year's Good Deeds auction." There was polite applause. Agatha, folding her arms, whispered to Doris Simpson, "It's not exactly Sotheby's." Doris grinned. "You'd think we were bidding for the Queen's jewels. Wait till they start offering babysitting." The auction began. A 2-hour ironing session fetched £3. A week of fresh eggs went for 4. Then came a day of gardening help offered by Mrs. Freddie Cross herself. Agatha, never one to be outdone by a smug woman with immaculate begonias, raised her paddle. £10, she announced firmly. 11, came a voice from the back. Mrs. Cross's best friend, Edna Merrifield, who had clearly been primed. 12, snapped Agatha. 13, Edna countered. Agatha glared. 14! The hall tittered. Mrs. Bloxby gave her a pleading smile as though reminding her it was for charity, not combat. 15 to Mrs. Raisin, said the vicar quickly, hammering down his gavel. Agatha smirked at her triumph, though her victory felt slightly ridiculous. She'd just bought a day of gardening she didn't want. As laughter rippled through the crowd, she noticed movement at the back. The London woman was slipping out quietly. Mrs. Bloxby saw it too, her expression tightening. Moments later came a commotion. Someone screamed. Eleanor Prowse, Carsley's tireless gossip and self-appointed treasurer of all things moral, was sprawled behind the trestle tables, a half-empty glass of lemonade beside her. Her plump face had turned an alarming shade of grey. "Oh, heavens!" gasped Mrs. Bloxby, rushing forward. Agatha pushed through the cluster of villagers. "Give her air, and someone call an ambulance." "Already on it," shouted Bill Wong, crouched by the body. He glanced up at Agatha, frowning. "She's still breathing, but barely. Poison, maybe. Don't let anyone touch that glass." The hall erupted in whispers. Agatha's pulse quickened with a mixture of horror and guilty fascination. Poisoned lemonade. It was practically an invitation. While Bill handled the police call, Agatha prowled around, pretending to assist. Doris sidled up. "She'd been counting the donations, you know," Doris whispered. "Said something funny earlier about a mystery payment." "What sort of payment?" "Didn't say, but she was waving a cheque about, all smug. Said it came from someone important." Agatha's gaze darted to Mrs. Bloxby, who stood pale and silent by the stage. The London woman, of course, was nowhere to be seen. When the ambulance arrived, the atmosphere curdled. Eleanor was taken away, and Bill began taking names. The villagers turned helpful in the way only English people could, by whispering loudly and speculating even more. "You saw her drink the lemonade?" Bill asked a nervous young mother. "She poured it herself, I think," came the reply. "From which jug?" "That one, by the sponge cakes." Agatha drifted closer, pretending interest in the cakes. She noticed something odd. 2 identical glass jugs side by side, but one had faint residue of sugar crystals along the rim, sloppily wiped. A clue, perhaps, or merely bad washing up. She caught Bill's eye. "You'll test both, of course." "We'll do what we can," he said dryly. "Meanwhile, try not to interrogate the entire village." "I was helping," she said, offended. "You were stirring," he corrected gently. Agatha retreated, muttering. Stirring was, in her view, vastly underrated. By the time the hall emptied, it had lost all its cheer. The bunting drooped, and the smell of lemonade turned faintly sickly. Agatha lingered by the door, cigarette in hand, watching Mrs. Bloxby speak to the vicar in low tones. He looked stricken. She looked determined. When they parted, Mrs. Bloxby stepped outside alone. Agatha followed, pretending coincidence. The evening was soft and blue, the drizzle gone. Mrs. Bloxby stood near the hedge, her back to the hall, clutching something small and white, a sealed envelope. Her shoulders trembled once, almost imperceptibly. Agatha hesitated. Sympathy was not her strong suit, yet she felt a pang. "Margaret?" she said softly. Mrs. Bloxby turned, quickly dabbing her eyes. "Oh, Agatha, I didn't hear you." "Are you all right?" "Of course, just so dreadful. What's happened?" "Yes," Agatha said, eyeing the envelope. "And odd, don't you think? A poisoning at a charity event. Almost poetic in a ghastly way." Mrs. Bloxby managed a faint smile. "Please don't make this worse. I must take this letter to the vestry." "Anything I can do?" "No, dear. Go home. Rest." Agatha wanted to press, to demand answers, but something in Mrs. Bloxby's face stopped her. She nodded instead. As she walked home through the damp lanes, her heels clicking irritably, Agatha replayed the afternoon in her mind. The stranger's departure, the poisoned gossip, the secret cheque, and Mrs. Bloxby's envelope. When she reached her cottage, Hodge was waiting on the windowsill, tail twitching. She scooped him up, sighing. "It's always the quiet ones, isn't it, Hodge? The ones who bake cakes and keep secrets." The cat yawned. Agatha lit a cigarette, exhaling toward the ceiling. "Poisoned lemonade at a good deeds auction," she murmured. "Carsely does have style." Outside, the village lights glowed like gossip held under glass. and somewhere beyond them, a black Saab idled briefly at the crossroads before vanishing into the night. The next morning arrived pale and apologetic, with a wind that smelled faintly of damp stone and disappointment. Carsely's cottages huddled under low clouds, pretending it wasn't another day for awkward questions. Agatha Raisin, who had slept badly and dreamt of poisoned lemonade, stood at her kitchen sink scowling into her tea. Hodge leapt onto the counter and meowed pointedly. "Don't start," she muttered. "We're both in need of comfort, and mine doesn't come in sachets of fish." After 2 cigarettes and half a slice of burnt toast, Agatha decided on a plan. She would casually drop by the vicarage and see what Mrs. Bloxby had to say for herself. After all, one didn't simply host a fatal charity auction and then retreat behind closed doors like a nun in a mystery novel. The vicarage looked unchanged, ivy creeping, gravel smug. But when Mrs. Bloxby opened the door, she looked 10 years older. Her usual calm had drained away, leaving only exhaustion politely disguised as serenity. "Agatha," she said, with a small smile, "how kind of you to visit." "Kind? Nonsense. I'm only here because you look dreadful," Agatha replied, pushing inside before she could be refused. The sitting room was warm, smelling faintly of lavender polish and moral restraint. The tea tray was already set out, as though Mrs. Bloxby had expected company, but hoped it wouldn't arrive. "I won't stay long," Agatha lied. "How are you holding up? I'd have rung, but I thought a personal visit would be more, well, discreet." That was thoughtful. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea with a hand that trembled only slightly. "I'm perfectly fine, really. Just tired. The police have been very thorough." "Bill Wong wouldn't dare be anything else," said Agatha. "Did he ask about that London woman? Grey suit, teeth that practically glowed in the dark." Mrs. Bloxby's spoon clinked against the cup. "Oh, her. She's simply someone helping with the accounts. It's all rather dull, I promise." "Dull? A woman dies at your auction and you're entertaining financial consultants from London. Come off it, Margaret." Mrs. Bloxby gave a weary laugh. "Agatha, please, I'm exhausted. Truly, I've nothing more to say." There it was again, that quiet barrier, soft but immovable. Agatha felt it like a door closing in her face. She stayed a few minutes longer, chattering about weather and the WI, but her hostess grew paler with each polite nod. Finally, Mrs. Bloxby said gently, "You should rest, dear. You've been through enough excitement yourself." Agatha bristled. "I thrive on excitement." "Yes," said Mrs. Bloxby kindly. "I know." Agatha left in a huff, heels clacking down the path. The drizzle had thickened to a damp mist, softening the edges of her irritation but not her resolve. By the time she reached her cottage, her mood had fermented nicely into righteous suspicion. She was halfway through lighting another cigarette when the doorbell rang. Charles Fraith leaned against her doorway, looking annoyingly relaxed in a suede jacket. His convertible gleamed damply behind him. "Morning, darling." I was in the area, meaning bored, and wondered how my favourite detective was faring. "If you were truly bored, you could always get a job," she said. He grinned. "I'd rather observe your attempts to save the Cotswolds from moral collapse. I hear there was a poisoning at your local charity bash. Shocking. Delicious, though." "You have the emotional depth of a teaspoon," Agatha said, though she secretly enjoyed his attention. Charles sauntered in without invitation as usual and perched on her sofa. "So, tell me, why the sudden concern for our saintly vicar's wife? You've been haunting the vicarage like an anxious ghost." Agatha poured him tea to avoid answering. "She's hiding something. I can tell. You've seen her, always serene, always forgiving. Yesterday she looked ready to confess to arson." "Maybe she's simply human," Charles said mildly. "Though I did hear an interesting tidbit from someone in Evesham. Your vicar was seen arguing with a woman outside the post office. Fancy London type, black Saab. Ring any bells?" Agatha's eyes narrowed. The same woman. What were they arguing about? "Couldn't hear. Probably the price of redemption. My informant was across the road buying stamps." Agatha sat forward. "That proves it. She's not just a consultant. She's connected to the poisoning somehow. You don't argue with vicars unless sin is involved." Charles chuckled. "You do, frequently." "That's different. I enjoy it." He studied her, amused. "You've gone quite proprietorial about Mrs. Bloxby. Is this friendship or obsession?" "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "I simply hate being lied to." Then you must loathe most of humanity. She gave him a look that could have melted slate. Before she could retort, the phone rang. Agatha grabbed it eagerly. It was Roy Silver, sounding breathless and self-satisfied. "Aggie, darling, you'll never guess what fell into my perfectly manicured lap this morning." "A mirror?" "Ha, ha. No, information. I was chatting with a PR contact who said there's been a bit of scandal around a charity auction consultant named Lila Venn. She was exposed for embezzlement in London last year. Disappeared before they could prosecute. Isn't that divine?" Agatha's pulse quickened. Lila Venn, that must be her, the London woman. What did she embezzle? Funds from church charities. Oh, and she's supposed to be terribly charming. People said she could make a bishop sign blank cheques. So she comes here, inserts herself into Mrs. Bloxby's event, and now our treasure has been poisoned. Wonderful. "Try not to sound so pleased, darling," Roy teased. "Anyway, must dash. My boss wants cappuccinos and redemption in equal measure." Agatha slammed the receiver down, triumphant. "You heard that, Charles. I knew it. She's a criminal. Probably came to blackmail someone in the parish, likely the vicar." "Or perhaps she was trying to reform," Charles offered lazily. "People do change." "Not in my experience, Père," said Agatha. "They just accessorize their sins differently." Charles stretched. "Well, my dear, shall we investigate? I've nothing pressing, and you're clearly desperate for excitement. I can drive us to Evesham tomorrow, see if this Lila Venn left any footprints." Agatha hesitated. The idea of Charles poking about might be useful and distracting. "Fine, but this isn't for fun, Charles. It's serious." "Everything's serious with you," he said, smiling. "That's what makes it entertaining." She pretended not to hear, focusing instead on Hodge, who had just leapt onto the armchair and begun washing his paw with bored precision. "See," she said, "even the cat's interested." "He's ignoring you," Charles observed. "Same thing." When he finally left, the cottage felt quieter, the silence echoing with unasked questions. Agatha wandered to the window, gazing toward the vicarage. The clouds hung low, pressing the roofs flat. Somewhere a dog barked with misplaced optimism. She replayed every detail of the auction, the twin lemonade jugs, the secret cheque, Mrs. Bloxby's trembling hands. Her instincts were alive again, sharp and merciless. She decided to ring Mrs. Bloxby one last time before bed, to smooth things over, or pry them open. The line clicked twice, then her friend's soft voice came through. "Agatha?" "Just checking in. You sure you're all right?" "Quite. Thank you, dear." "You still have that envelope?" A pause, then. "What envelope?" Agatha frowned. "The one you were holding yesterday. You said it was for the vestry." "Oh, that. I must have misplaced it." "Misplaced?" "Yes. Good night, Agatha." The line went dead. Agatha stared at the receiver. Misplaced indeed. She turned to Hodge, who was curled on her bed like a small grey cushion of indifference. "Gone," she muttered. "And don't tell me it's coincidence. Not in this village." Hodge blinked once, unimpressed. Agatha lit a final cigarette and sat on the edge of the bed. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, pale against the dark. "Tea, lies and sympathy," she murmured, usually in that order. Outside, the rain began again, soft as gossip, tapping at the window. Evesham in the morning had all the charm of a hungover teapot. The market square was half awake, the smell of damp bread rolls mixing with car exhaust and gossip. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a camel coat and impatience, sat outside a cafe pretending to read the Evesham Journal. Charles Fraith lounged opposite her, looking far too comfortable for a man on a stakeout. "You look ridiculous hiding behind that paper," Charles said, sipping his coffee. "I'm observing," said Agatha. "One must blend in." "Blend in? You're wearing red lipstick at 9 a.m. and glaring at everyone like a customs officer." Agatha lowered the newspaper. "Someone has to keep their eyes open. You, for instance, haven't moved in 20 minutes. "I'm perfecting stillness. Very useful in observation and hangovers." Agatha sniffed. The cafe, the Green Bean, was fashionable by Evesham standards. Pale wood tables, posters about fair trade, and coffee served by people with complicated hair. She hated it on sight. They had come because Lila Venn, the London woman with the immaculate teeth, was said to meet clients here. Charles had volunteered to drive, claiming it was an adventure. Agatha suspected it was mostly an excuse to escape his accountant. The waitress appeared. "Would you like anything else?" "Skimmed milk," said Agatha briskly. This full-cream stuff could butter toast. The waitress gave her a blank look. Charles sighed. So much for undercover. Agatha ignored him, eyes narrowing at the door. A woman had entered, tall, slim, expensively bored. She wore a dove-grey suit and carried a folder under one arm. Her hair was a glossy brown curtain, her smile a performance. "That's her," Agatha whispered. "How thrilling," murmured Charles. "Shall we pounce or purr?" "We wait." They didn't wait long. Lila Venn took a table by the window and ordered a cappuccino with quiet authority. When she opened her folder, Agatha glimpsed spreadsheets, typed letters, and a cheque bearing the Carsely Church Trust name. "Got you," Agatha murmured, rising abruptly. "Aggie, for heaven's sake." Too late. Agatha marched over and planted herself opposite Lila with the confidence of someone who had never been invited. "Mrs. Venn, I presume." Lila looked up, startled but composed. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Not yet. I'm Agatha Raisin, Carsely. You visited our vicarage last week." "Oh, yes, the good deeds auction. Terrible business." "Indeed. You were consulting on the accounts, weren't you?" "That's right. I specialize in modernizing rural fundraising. People underestimate the value of branding." "And you do this out of the goodness of your heart, no doubt." "Naturally, I'm paid for my expertise. Even goodwill has overheads." Agatha leaned forward. "Funny thing, someone was poisoned at that auction, and now you've vanished faster than free cake." Lila's hand paused on her cup. "I had meetings elsewhere. You can hardly think I had anything to do with it." "Of course not," said Agatha sweetly. "Although I do wonder, did you know Mrs. Bloxby before this? Some people say you did." Something flickered across Lila's expression. Recognition, perhaps guilt. "I met her years ago through a London charity. She's a good woman. I respect her enormously." "So much that you came all this way to help?" "It's what I do." Agatha tilted her head. "Strange, then, that your name came up in connection with embezzlement. Charity funds, I hear. Must have been an awkward misunderstanding." Colour drained from Lila's cheeks. "That was never proved." "Oh, I believe you," said Agatha. "But others might not, especially if they thought you were here for hush money." Lila rose abruptly, gathering her things. "You're an appalling woman. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" "No. And if you care about your precious vicar's wife, you'll stop asking questions you don't understand." With that, she turned and collided headlong with someone entering the cafe. The impact scattered papers and indignation alike. "Good heavens," said Bill Wong, steadying her. "Mrs. Venn, isn't it? Small world." Agatha's satisfaction was instant. "Bill, fancy seeing you here. How lovely." "You told me you were going shopping," he said mildly. "I am. Investigating prices." Bill gathered the fallen papers, handing them to Lila. "Mind if we have a chat at the station later? Purely routine." "Of course," she said tightly, brushing past him into the drizzle. Agatha smirked. "Well, that went swimmingly." "You frightened her off," Bill said. "You can't keep ambushing suspects in public places." "Suspects? So she is one." "I didn't say that." "You implied it." "You inferred it." Charles rose, smiling. "Come along, children. Let's take our drama back to Carsely before someone mistakes us for a touring company." By the time they reached the village, Carsely's rumour mill had outpaced them. Doris Simpson flagged Agatha down outside the shop. "Did you hear, Mrs. Raisin? That London woman, the fancy one, was seen years ago with our vicar's wife. Some charity in Battersea, they say, before Mrs. Bloxby married." "Really?" said Agatha, feigning mild curiosity while her heart sped up. "And how do you know that?" "Mrs. Cross told Mrs. Merrifield, who told me. Reliable as anything." Agatha thanked her and drove on, muttering to Charles, "I knew it. They've got history." "Or just friendship," said Charles. "Not every connection is sinister." "You're hopeless. When women keep secrets, it's never innocent." "What about you?" "Mine are strategic, not secret." Charles chuckled. "Of course." Back at her cottage, Hodge greeted them with imperious indifference. Agatha bent to stroke him, pretending calm. "He's your better half," Charles said. "He disapproves less." "He's a realist," she replied, pouring herself a gin. "And he never tells me to be patient." Bill arrived half an hour later, looking weary but amused. "You've stirred things nicely, Mrs. Raisin. Mrs. Venn gave me a long speech about harassment. She insists she's innocent and deeply offended." "They always do," said Agatha. "She claims she came here at the vicar's wife's invitation to modernize parish fundraising, Says she's staying in Evesham till things calm down." "And you believe her?" Bill gave her a patient look. "I'm keeping an open mind. You might try it." "Open minds let in draughts," she said. Charles chuckled into his sherry. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" Bill ignored him. "By the way, Agatha, don't go bothering Mrs. Bloxby. She's already upset enough." "Upset? Seems she didn't know Mrs. Venn had such a past. The connection's embarrassing, that's all. Leave it be for now." He left before she could argue. Agatha sat back, frowning. "He's protecting her. They all are." "Maybe he's just decent," said Charles. "You and your decency. It's overrated. No one's innocent in this village, especially not the ones who look it." Charles rose to leave. "If you start interrogating the clergy, do call me. I'd hate to miss it." "Go home, Charles. You're delightful when you're plotting," he said, and left. The house fell silent except for the tick of the clock and Hodge's steady grooming. Agatha poured another drink and sat by the window. The drizzle had thickened again, blurring the outlines of Carsely. She should have felt triumphant. She'd flushed out a suspect, rattled Bill, and uncovered gossip that could fuel the Red Lion for weeks. Yet something in Mrs. Bloxby's pale face lingered in her mind. At 10:30, just as she was considering bed, came the sound of a faint scrape at her front door. Hodge's ears twitched. Agatha froze, cigarette halfway to her lips. She crossed the hall and opened the door a crack. No one. Only damp air and the smell of wood smoke. On the mat lay an envelope, pale against the tiles. No address, no stamp, just her name scrawled in hurried ink. She tore it open. A single sheet inside bore 7 words. "Ask the vicar what he paid for his wife's silence." Agatha read it twice, then slowly folded it back into the envelope. She stood there, heart thudding, while Hodge padded over and wound around her legs, unimpressed by anonymous intrigue. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she muttered. "Even you'd be curious." She carried the letter to the kitchen and tucked it behind Hodge's tin of salmon chunks. A sensible cat, she thought, would make an excellent witness, if only he could talk. Lighting another cigarette, she leaned on the counter, watching the smoke curl upward. "The vicar's silence," she murmured, "or hers." Outside, the rain deepened into a steady fall, tapping against the windows like someone asking for entry. Hodge stretched, yawned, and returned to his basket, leaving Agatha alone with the whispering dark and her own restless imagination. It was one of those deceptive mornings that made Carsely look innocent. Sunlight spilled over the honeystone cottages, and the air had that smug stillness peculiar to villages after scandal, like a cat pretending it hadn't eaten the canary. Agatha Raisin, however, was in no mood for pastoral calm. She had spent half the night brooding over the anonymous note, replaying the words until they sounded like a curse. Now she prowled about her kitchen, chain-smoking and snapping at the radio. Hodge watched from the windowsill, whiskers twitching at each burst of static. The doorbell rang just as she stubbed out her 3rd cigarette. She opened the door to find Mrs. Bloxby standing there, clutching a cake tin. "Margaret, I was just thinking of you," said Agatha too quickly. "How fortunate," said Mrs. Bloxby mildly. "I brought a little something, Victoria sponge. I thought you might fancy a slice with your morning tea." "Tea," said Agatha flatly, "is for people who've given up on gin. Come in." The vicar's wife stepped inside, her expression serene but tired. She wore her usual pastel cardigan, though it hung loosely today, as if the colour itself had lost confidence. Agatha led her into the sitting room and fussed with cups to disguise her curiosity. "I'll get the plates," said Agatha. "It looks delicious." "It's comfort food," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "You seem to need some." "You're one to talk," Agatha replied. "You've been looking like death warmed up since that blasted auction." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "You're blunt as ever." "And you're evasive as ever," Agatha countered. "So, what's this really about? Confession or cake?" "Both, perhaps," said Mrs. Bloxby. The remark silenced Agatha for all of 10 seconds. Mrs. Bloxby folded her hands and took a breath. "I wanted to explain something before you hear it from others. I did know that woman, Lila Venn, many years ago in London. We worked together for a church charity. She was bright, ambitious, persuasive, rather like you, Agatha." "Flattery won't save you," said Agatha, though her curiosity softened her tone. "What sort of charity?" "A mission for homeless women. I was quite young and Lila was in charge of the accounts. When I married Mr. Bloxby, we lost touch. I had no idea she'd changed." Changed into what? An embezzler or a murderer? Mrs. Bloxby's eyes flicked up, startled. I beg you not to say such things. I simply wanted to be honest. When she reappeared, I was shocked. Then why hide it? Mrs. Bloxby looked down at her lap. Because the past is seldom simple, and because of the photograph. Agatha's pulse quickened. The one in the envelope? Yes. It was taken at the Battersea Mission, the charity I mentioned. Someone sent it anonymously to me before the auction. I recognized faces from those days. Mine, Lila's, and others I would rather not have discussed. Such as? Please, Agatha, she said quietly. I came only to ask your discretion. Nothing more. You can't just drop a crumb like that and expect me not to follow it. Mrs. Bloxby rose, smoothing her skirt. Then consider it a test of friendship. I must go. I promised the vicar I'd help prepare the parish newsletter. Fine, said Agatha, but don't expect me to sit quietly while foxglove tea kills people. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes widened slightly. You've heard about the post-mortem? Of course I have. Doris told me before breakfast. She heard it from her cousin at the surgery. Then you'll know poor Eleanor had digitalis poisoning. It may have been accidental. Accidental, my foot, said Agatha. That woman couldn't boil water without burning it. You expect me to believe she brewed herself foxglove tea by mistake. Sometimes people make choices we can't understand, said Mrs. Bloxby, her voice distant. Agatha narrowed her eyes. You mean suicide? Rubbish. Eleanor was far too nosy to die quietly. Mrs. Bloxby smiled sadly. I must go. Please don't trouble yourself further, dear. Too late for that, muttered Agatha as the door closed behind her. By afternoon, the village had recovered its appetite for gossip. Agatha walked to the shop for milk and left with 3 different theories instead. Doris Simpson was behind the counter, dispensing both change and speculation. Terrible business, Mrs. Raisin, but between you and me, I saw the vicar himself talking to that Lila woman the day before it happened, right there on the green. Looked like a proper row. You're certain? As certain as I am that Mrs. Cross waters her begonias with gin. He was waving his arms about like he'd dropped his Bible in a puddle. Agatha thanked her with unnecessary formality and hurried home, thoughts colliding like dodgems, the vicar arguing with Lila, Mrs. Bloxby hiding an old photograph, and a convenient accident that killed the one person who might have known what really happened. When she reached the cottage, Hodge greeted her with a flick of his tail that plainly said she was late. She fed him, then poured herself a gin and tonic, light on tonic, and tried to impose order on her notes. The facts refused to behave. At 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Bill Wong's calm voice came down the line. Agatha, just checking in. The post-mortem confirms digitalis. Probably brewed, possibly ingested in tea. I could have told you that. Any progress? Not yet. The lab's testing the jugs from the hall. But listen, don't get involved, I mean it. You're too late, Bill. I'm already involved. I know. That's why I'm warning you. Whoever left that note at your door, don't assume it's a friend. Agatha hesitated. I never said it was a note. Charles mentioned it, he said patiently. And Charles talks. Traitor, she muttered. Anyway, I'm perfectly safe. Just be careful, and keep away from Mrs. Bloxby for now. She needs peace. What she needs is to stop keeping secrets. Bill sighed. You always think everyone's hiding something. They are. That's why I'm better at your job than you are. He laughed softly and rang off. Agatha sat staring at the silent receiver. Outside, dusk was turning the village to watercolour. Soft, unthreatening, deceitful. She couldn't shake the sense that everything she touched lately seemed to ripple with guilt. She wandered to the window, cigarette in hand. Across the green, the vicarage lights glowed. She imagined Mrs. Bloxby inside, pouring tea, pretending normal life was still possible. Peace, Agatha muttered. What a dreadful bore. Later that night, she heard the post-flap clatter. She frowned. It was far too late for mail. Hodge, curled on the armchair, raised his head but didn't move. Agatha crossed the hall, switched on the porch light and found a single envelope lying on the mat. Her first thought was another note, but when she opened it, something slid out and fluttered to the floor. A photograph. It was old, slightly curled at the edges, black and white, the kind once printed at chemists'. 3 people stood outside a church hall, Lila Venn in her youth, Mrs. Bloxby beside her, and between them a tall man in clerical collar, smiling as if he believed in everything. Agatha stared at it. The handwriting on the back was neat and faint. Battersea Mission, 1981. She felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Someone had gone to the trouble of returning what Mrs. Bloxby had lost, or stolen. "Well, Hodge," she said softly, holding the photograph to the light, "looks like the past has excellent timing." The cat yawned and resumed his nap. Agatha set the picture on the mantelpiece, poured herself another gin, and studied the faces again. The three of them looked so young, so earnest, so ready to believe the world could be saved by good intentions. "It always starts with charity," she murmured. "Then comes the poison." She lit another cigarette, the smoke curling around her like the beginning of an answer. Outside, a church bell tolled the hour, as if reminding her that every confession demanded a listener. Agatha exhaled slowly and watched Hodge stretch in his sleep. "Cake, confession, and deceit," she said. "Carsely really ought to have its own commandments." The cat's tail flicked once, approvingly, or perhaps just at the scent of sponge cake cooling on the counter. Morning in Carsely arrived with deceptive innocence. The mist that had rolled through the night still clung to the hedgerows, curling over the cottages like gossip reluctant to disperse. Agatha Raisin stood by her kitchen window, staring at the photograph she had propped against the sugar jar. Mrs. Bloxby, Lila Venn, and the vicar, at least a man who looked remarkably like him, standing outside a London mission in 1981, all three smiling as if nothing in life could possibly go wrong. "Battersea Mission," Agatha murmured aloud. "Spring 1981. A picture of virtue, my foot." Hodge sat nearby, tail twitching with mild disapproval at the lack of breakfast service. All right," she said, scattering cat food into his dish. "At least you're honest about your appetites." She poured herself tea but found it unsatisfactory. Tea was too gentle for scandal. Gin would have been more appropriate, but even Agatha hesitated before 11. Her mind refused to settle. That photograph was a loaded gun wrapped in nostalgia. And if it really was the vicar, then Mrs. Bloxby's tidy moral world had just acquired some very messy edges. By 10 o'clock, she could bear it no longer. She telephoned Bill Wong at the Mercester police station, disguising her tone as casual. "Bill, darling, purely hypothetically, what if someone sent a rather incriminating photograph through the post?" "Hypothetically," he said dryly, "I'd suggest that someone stop meddling and hand it in." "I can't do that. It's personal." "Personal to you?" "Personal to someone who may have more to hide than she realizes." "Agatha, don't go jumping to conclusions about Mrs. Bloxby. She's a vicar's wife, not Matahari." "You're too trusting. The woman's got secrets, Victorian ones, probably bound in gilt and lace." Bill sighed. "Look, if it is the vicar in that photo, it proves nothing except that he owned a clerical collar 20 years ago. Don't build a bonfire out of a matchstick." "I'll decide what's flammable," said Agatha. "Promise me you'll stay put." "Promise I'll think about it," she said sweetly, and hung up. An hour later, Charles Frayth was lounging in her sitting room with the self-satisfied air of a man who had arrived purely to be entertained. "So that's the scandalous photo," he said, examining it. "Good heavens, Agatha, they look positively wholesome. How dreary." "It's not dreary, it's evidence." "Of what? Haircuts in the 1980s? "Of deceit," she said. "Look, Mrs. Bloxby and Lila arm in arm, and the vicar between them like St. Peter on holiday. And this was just before the Battersea Mission folded, because someone nicked the funds." "You're suggesting the vicar had a hand in embezzlement?" "I'm suggesting that our beloved vicar and his virtuous wife may have a history best kept under lock and hymn book." Charles grinned. "Adultery, embezzlement, or espionage. Take your pick. I say adultery. Far more fun for everyone." "Don't be vulgar." "You'd be disappointed if I weren't." Agatha glared, though his levity comforted her more than she'd admit. "I'm going to London," she declared. "What for?" "To see this Battersea Mission for myself. If there's dirt, I'll find it." "Splendid. And who's your accomplice? I'm allergic to London parking." "Roy Silver. He's perfect for camouflage. No one notices a man in turquoise." Roy arrived at the station the next morning, dressed like an explosion in a fabric shop. Lime scarf, pink shirt, silver shoes. He swept Agatha into an air kiss before the train doors closed. "Darling, why are we slumming it on public transport?" "Because your Minnie looks like it's held together with sequins and Charles refused to come." "He said that? How rude. I'll have him know my car is an icon." Agatha grunted, rummaging in her handbag. "We're investigating a closed charity called the Battersea Mission. Lila Venn worked there, Mrs. Bloxby too, possibly the vicar. Funds disappeared, everyone went quiet." Roy's eyes widened. "Darling, you're implying the vicar embezzled church money. Delicious. Can I tell my PR firm?" "You'll tell no one. We're here to research, not broadcast." "You're losing your touch. The old Agatha would have faxed Fleet Street by now." "The old Agatha is older and wiser," she said, though a small voice inside muttered, "and lonelier." London greeted them with a grimy drizzle that turned everything the same shade of resignation. The Battersea Mission building stood boarded up behind a rusted gate, its faded sign half peeled away. "Charming," Roy said. "I can almost hear the choirs." A caretaker, startled by their persistence, admitted them after much persuasion and one exaggerated sob from Roy. Inside smelled of damp plaster and forgotten sermons. Agatha's heels echoed down the corridor. "This place hasn't seen a hymn since Thatcher," she muttered. In a dusty office they found boxes of files, yellowing records of donations, minutes and receipts. Most were unremarkable, until Agatha pulled out a ledger dated 1981. "Here, look, funds withdrawn from Women's Outreach account signed by someone with the initials MB. "Margaret Bloxby," Roy whispered, delighted. "Or another MB," said Agatha, though her heart thumped. She copied the entry into her notebook. The caretaker, eager to usher them out, mentioned that the mission had shut after some money business, but claimed ignorance of details. Back on the street, Roy looked smug. "So, the saintly Mrs. Bloxby might have handled the cash. Scandal in the parish." "Or she was covering for someone," Agatha said. "We don't know the whole story." "When do you ever?" "Don't be cheeky. Buy me tea and we'll plan our next move." They found a cafe that smelled of burnt sugar and regret. Roy chattered about London gossip, but Agatha was lost in thought. The vicar's wife, forging cheques. It didn't fit, unless it was out of loyalty. Loyalty could make fools of clever people. "You've gone quiet," Roy said, peering over his muffin. "That usually means you're planning something reckless." "Just thinking," said Agatha. "If Eleanor Prouse stumbled on this, she might have tried to use it. Blackmail, maybe, and Lila came back to silence her. So now you've got embezzlement and murder. Truly, darling, you should open an agency. Don't tempt me." By late afternoon, she was back in Carsely, notebook full, shoes damp, temper frayed. She called Bill Wong to share her findings. "You broke into a derelict building," he said. "Hardly. We were let in by a man of questionable hygiene." "Agatha, if you've taken files—" "I copied notes, not evidence. I'm not a criminal, Bill." "That's debatable." "You're missing the point. There's proof someone with the initials MB withdrew funds from the mission account." "MB could be anyone. Don't jump to conclusions." "You're right. It could be Moses the Beadle." "Who?" "Never mind. I'm telling you, the Bloxbys are at the heart of this." Bill groaned. "Try not to publish that thought before I've checked it." "Oh, you'll check it all right," she said, and hung up. Evening brought a brief calm. Agatha fed Hodge, poured herself wine, and contemplated the growing web of deceit from the safety of her armchair. The cottage smelled of lavender polish and feline authority. Charles phoned. "Well, my dear, did your urban adventure yield sin and scandal?" "Something close. The Battersea Mission's books were dodgy. Someone with MB initials handled withdrawals. Guess who?" "Margaret Bloxby. Delicious." "It's not delicious. It's tragic. She's the only decent person I know, which makes it unbearable." "You're sentimental," said Charles. "I'm proud of you." "Don't mock me, and don't tell anyone yet." "Of course not, but if you need a drink and moral corruption, my cellar's always open." She smiled despite herself. "You're insufferable. And available." She hung up before he could charm her further. Later that night, as the village slept beneath its quilt of drizzle, Agatha sat writing notes. Hodge dozed on the rug, one ear flicking at the sound of her pen. A faint creak interrupted her concentration. She looked up, frowning. The cottage was old. It sighed and settled often. But then came another sound, the soft scrape of a latch. Her heart thudded. She rose quietly, cigarette lighter in hand like a weapon, and tiptoed to the hallway. The door handle moved. Before she could shout, Hodge sprang from the shadows with an indignant yowl that would have terrified burglars and bishops alike. There was a startled curse outside, then the slam of retreating footsteps. Agatha flung the door open just in time to see a dark figure vanish round the gate. "Coward!" she shouted, though her knees wobbled. Hodge sat in the doorway, tail bristled, eyes triumphant. "Good heavens, you're better than a burglar alarm," Agatha said, scooping him up. "You've earned the expensive salmon." She locked the door, double-bolted it, then poured herself another generous measure of gin. Someone had tried to get into her house, probably after the photograph. "Well," she said aloud, raising her glass to Hodge, "we must be getting close to something, my friend. Trouble always arrives when I'm nearly right." Hodge purred, unimpressed by her logic but pleased with his supper. Agatha sat back in her chair, nerves settling, and allowed herself a thin, wry smile. "If anyone thinks they can frighten me out of a mystery," she muttered, "they've clearly never met Agatha Raisin." Outside, the rain fell harder, steady as applause. Carsely awoke under a bruised sky that promised rain and kept its promise by 9. Agatha Raisin sat in her kitchen, glaring at the damp world through the window while Hodge delicately licked his paw on the table. An act of quiet rebellion she lacked the heart to correct. She was furious. Furious that someone had dared break into her cottage, and even more furious that they had taken only one thing, the photograph. It was almost insulting. Any respectable burglar would have at least shown interest in her stereo or her nearly new cashmere jumper. She jabbed at her toast and muttered, "You could have at least stolen the bills, you idiot." Hodge flicked an ear. He'd heard worse. The phone rang, sharp and officious. Bill Wong's voice, steady as ever, came down the line. "Agatha, I've heard about the break-in. You all right?" "Perfectly fine, thank you. I've survived far worse. Flu, for instance, but the nerve of it. Nothing gone except one photograph." "You mean the one you shouldn't have had? It was posted to me. That makes it a gift." "Try telling the law that. Look, I'll send someone to dust for prints. Don't bother. They probably wore gloves. Only competent criminals break into my house." Bill sighed. "Just stay cautious, and stop poking at Mrs. Bloxby's past. You're upsetting her." "Oh, am I?" she said sweetly. "Well, perhaps she should stop keeping secrets in other people's letterboxes." "Agatha," but she had already hung up. By mid-morning, a knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Bloxby standing there, hatless despite the drizzle, clutching a handkerchief. "Oh, Agatha," she began, eyes shiny with distress. "I heard about the burglary. You must be shaken." "I'm livid, not shaken," said Agatha, stepping aside. "Come in before you rust." Mrs. Bloxby perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting her handkerchief like a flag of surrender. "You don't understand," she said softly. "That photograph, it wasn't meant for you. You shouldn't have seen it. And yet someone wanted to make sure I did. Care to explain why?" "Please, Agatha, leave this alone, I beg you." Agatha folded her arms. "I don't take orders, Margaret, particularly from friends who hide things from me." The vicar's wife flinched at the word friends. "I never meant to hurt you. I was only trying to protect—" "Whom?" Mrs. Bloxby's voice broke. "Everyone. Just let the past be." "That's easy to say when it's yours," Agatha snapped. Tears welled in Mrs. Bloxby's eyes. "You've no idea what damage you could cause. Please stop." Before Agatha could reply, she was already retreating to the door, murmuring apologies. And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and guilt. Agatha stood in the silence, anger mixing with something far more uncomfortable, hurt. It was one thing to be lied to by suspects, quite another by the only person she trusted to speak kindly of her. "Fine," she muttered. "If she won't tell me the truth, I'll find it myself." Hodge, curled on the armchair, opened one lazy eye in agreement. That afternoon, Bill called again. Bit of an update. Eleanor Prouse made a phone call a few days before her death to the old treasurer of the Battersea mission. Seems she was sniffing around the missing funds. Agatha's eyes lit up. "So she was investigating. That explains everything." "Explains nothing yet," Bill corrected. "And before you say it, yes, we're looking for Lila Venn. She's disappeared from her hotel in Evesham, didn't even settle the bill." "A thief and a dine and dasher," said Agatha. "She's probably holed up nearby, pretending to be spiritual. That woman could make sainthood look corrupt." Agatha, don't go hunting her down. I mean it. Oh, stop worrying. I wouldn't dream of it. She hung up, already dreaming exactly of that. 2 evenings later, Charles Fraith rang with the cheerful energy of someone whose life contained no actual problems. My dear, enough gloom. I'm hosting a little dinner tomorrow at the Manor. Just a few people to restore social balance. You, me, Bill, the vicar, Mrs. Bloxby. Consider it détente. You're inviting the vicar and his wife to dine with the woman they wish lived abroad. Exactly. Nothing heals scandal like good wine and awkward conversation. You're impossible. And you're coming, he said, hanging up before she could protest. The following evening, Carsely was slick with drizzle, hedges shining like wet satin under the Manor's lamps. Agatha arrived in a dress slightly too glamorous for the countryside, and a mood equally overdressed. Charles's dining room gleamed with candles, silver, and well-rehearsed charm. The vicar looked nervous, his wife pale. Bill Wong appeared resigned. Lovely evening, said Charles. No one's to mention murder, scandal, or foxgloves until after pudding. That rules out most of my conversation, said Agatha, taking her seat. Dinner began with a politeness so brittle it could have cracked under a sigh. The conversation tiptoed around safe topics, village flower shows, weather patterns, and Doris Simpson's new perm. Agatha tried to behave, she truly did. But 2 glasses of wine later, her restraint gave way. Tell me, Margaret, she said, smiling too brightly. What did happen in Battersea? The question landed like a dropped tray. The vicar choked on his lamb. Mrs. Bloxby went white. Bill stared at his plate. Charles, the traitor, leaned back, clearly enjoying the explosion. I beg your pardon, the vicar said stiffly. Agatha pressed on. You, Mrs. Bloxby, and Miss Venn. A little charity with a big bank account. Then, poof, the funds vanish, the mission folds, and 20 years later, someone winds up dead. Care to elaborate? Agatha, Bill hissed. For once, hold your tongue. But she couldn't. Her pride had taken the reins. Don't look so shocked, Bill. I'm merely asking questions you're too polite to pose. Mrs. Bloxby stood abruptly. This is intolerable. How dare you? Agatha opened her mouth, then saw something she hadn't expected. Tears. Real, shining tears trembling at the edge of composure. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bloxby said, voice shaking. I can't. Please excuse me. She fled the table. The vicar rose, face ashen. Mrs. Raisin, you've no idea what harm you do with your insinuations. On the contrary, she said quietly, I've a very good idea. The room hung silent until Charles, ever the diplomat, rang for dessert as if nothing had happened. Anyone for trifle? He said pleasantly. Later, when the guests had departed in varying states of indignation, Charles poured Agatha a final glass of brandy. Well done, my dear. You've achieved the impossible, offending both the clergy and the constabulary in one evening. Don't gloat. I was only trying to get the truth. And instead you got tears. You should have let it lie. Since when do you advocate morality? Since it makes for better company. You looked almost guilty, Agatha. Quite touching. Nonsense. I never feel guilt. Indigestion, perhaps. She drained the glass, but her bravado felt thin. Driving home through the mist, she told herself she'd been right to ask. Truth mattered, yet the echo of Mrs. Bloxby's voice, cracked with hurt, lingered uncomfortably. Hodge met her at the door, tail erect, demanding dinner. At least you don't take things personally, she said, dropping food into his bowl. He purred, indifferent philosopher that he was. She changed into her dressing gown, poured a gin, and sat in the dark with the television murmuring nonsense. Carsely slept. Even the drizzle had given up. At midnight, a police car passed slowly along the lane, blue light muted under fog. Moments later, the phone rang. Bill's voice, low and strained, reached her ear. Agatha, you'd better sit down. Lila Venn's been found, dead in her car, engine running, in a barn near Evesham. Agatha froze, glass halfway to her lips. Suicide? She asked. We'll see, but it doesn't feel like it. Nothing ever does, she murmured. After she hung up, she went to the window. The fog pressed against the glass like breath. Somewhere beyond it lay a barn, a body, and the next chapter of her own foolish determination. So much for social balance, she told Hodge. He stretched luxuriously and yawned. Yes, she said softly. That's about the size of it. She stubbed out her cigarette, feeling the faint sting of remorse, and went to bed wondering whether she had just helped uncover the truth, or push someone too close to it. Outside, Carsely's church bell tolled once, as if marking the death of another illusion. The Cotswolds wore their mourning colours well. Mist hung low over the hedgerows, muting the honeystone cottages into sepia. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a camel coat that had cost more than her dignity was worth that morning, stood on the edge of a muddy lane, watching Bill Wong direct constables round a shabby barn. Inside, the air reeked of exhaust fumes and wilted perfume. Lila Venn's body sat slumped over the wheel of her black Saab, the same one that had brought whispers and trouble to Carsely. A patch of smudged lipstick clung to her lower lip, the sort of careless imperfection Lila would never have tolerated alive. Agatha noted everything: the missing handbag, the car keys in the ignition, the doors locked from the inside, too neatly. It was a scene designed to look tragic, but it smelled of convenience. "Suicide?" she asked. Bill shook his head. "Not quite that simple. Her handbag's gone for a start, and there are fingerprints, none of them hers, on the inside of the driver's window. So someone else was with her. Or someone helped her decide she didn't want to be alive anymore," Bill said dryly. Agatha folded her arms. "I hate tidy suicides. They're never tidy enough." He gave her a look. "Promise me you'll stay out of this one, Agatha." "Of course," she said sweetly, already planning her first move. Back in Carsely, the news spread faster than mildew. By afternoon, the Red Lion was humming with speculation. Doris Simpson held court near the fire, recounting to anyone within earshot that Lila had London ways and men with briefcases. Agatha sat at the bar, nursing a gin and tonic, half listening, half glaring. It irked her that the village now linked Lila's death to Mrs. Bloxby's sudden nerves and the vicar's uncharacteristic silence. When Charles appeared, immaculate in tweed and insensitivity, she was almost relieved. "Heard the grim news," he said, taking the stool beside her. "Suicide's such a bore, don't you think? All that drama without any conversation." "You're appalling. And yet you adore me." She rolled her eyes. "She didn't kill herself. It's too neat. Missing handbag, smudged lipstick, no woman ends her life looking like she's missed her mouth." "You're assuming vanity equals motive. Very you, darling." "Someone wanted her quiet. I'm going to find out who." "You might start with our saintly vicar and his trembling wife," Charles murmured. "Half the village thinks he's next for the confessional." "Don't," she snapped. "They've suffered enough. Since when have you been tender-hearted?" "Since 5 minutes ago," she said grimly, finishing her drink. Mrs. Bloxby had indeed vanished from public life. The vicarage curtains stayed drawn, and her usual calm presence at the post office and Women's Institute had evaporated. The village, starved of her serenity, grew restive. Agatha tried to visit twice, both times turned politely away by the vicar. "She needs rest, Mrs. Raisin," he said, eyes shadowed. Agatha's patience, never a durable thing, snapped on the third day. She drove back to the barn outside Evesham, demanding to see the car again. The constable on guard, a lad young enough to still believe in caution, tried to stop her. "I'm helping Sergeant Wong," she lied briskly. "He said I could take another look." She ducked under the tape before he found the courage to contradict her. Inside, the Saab was a coffin of stale perfume. She crouched, gloved fingers brushing across the seat and the glove box. It opened easily. Inside were some receipts, a lipstick the wrong shade for Lila, and a folded Carsely parish newsletter dated the day before Eleanor Prouse died. Agatha frowned. Eleanor Prouse, the woman who'd been poisoned with foxglove tea. The newsletter was addressed to her. "Well," Agatha muttered, "that's one subscription nobody will renew." She pocketed the clue and left, stepping back into the drizzle, feeling both victorious and unsettled. That evening she phoned Roy Silver. He answered in his usual whirlwind of energy. "Darling, I'm knee-deep in client disasters. Tell me you have gossip more glamorous than mine." "I've got murder," said Agatha. "How's that for glamorous?" "Splendid. Who's dead now?" "Lila Venn. Found in her car. Looks like suicide. Smells like nonsense. And listen, didn't you say you could dig up something about her Battersea days?" "Already ahead of you, Angel. I had my intern comb through the archives. Turns out our Miss Venn once pretended to be an accountant for the Battersea mission. She was funneling donations through a fake London address. Got caught, of course. Quiet cover-up. She reinvented herself as a charity consultant. So, she's a crook with manners. And charm. I saw her photo in an old paper. Fabulous cheekbones. Probably could have sold sin to a bishop." "She nearly did," Agatha said darkly. "This ties everything together. Eleanor must have uncovered the embezzlement. Lila silenced her, and now someone silenced Lila. If you're right, darling, it means whoever killed her still has something to hide." "Exactly. And I intend to find out who." "Do be careful, Aggie. Remember last time you poked around and ended up in a chicken coop?" "That was investigative ingenuity." "That was trespassing in feathers." She hung up, smiling faintly despite herself. Roy's nonsense was oddly comforting. The next morning dawned sharp and cold. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, the parish newsletter spread before her. The front page featured a sermon on the wages of deceit. "Subtle," she muttered, lighting a cigarette. Hodge yawned pointedly at the smoke. The phone rang again. Bill this time, his tone brisk. The coroner's confirmed it. Foul play. Exhaust was rigged with tape from the outside, and someone wiped the handles. This wasn't suicide. "I knew it. Have you questioned the vicar yet?" "No, and you're not to either." "He's hiding something, Bill. Possibly protecting someone. You'd do the same." Agatha hesitated. "Would I?" "You'd destroy the village to save a friend. That's half the problem." She hung up without answering. By evening, her determination outweighed her conscience. She marched to the vicarage, reins slicking her hair, and hammered on the door. The vicar opened it slowly, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "Mrs. Raisin," he said quietly, "I suppose I knew you'd come. I just want the truth, Reverend. If you don't tell me, someone else will, and they'll twist it." He sighed, leading her into the parlour. The room smelled of dust and grief. Mrs. Bloxby was nowhere in sight. "You must promise me this goes no further," he began. "I promise nothing," she said, taking a seat. He looked at his hands, as though words were written there. "When I was a curate in London, I helped run the Battersea mission. Margaret was a volunteer, young, devoted, far too trusting. Lila Venn handled accounts. When money went missing, Margaret discovered the theft but refused to report her friend. She came to me instead. I adjusted the records. I told myself it was compassion. In truth, it was cowardice." "You covered up embezzlement?" "Yes, to protect Margaret. She believed Lila would change, and she did, for the worse. When Margaret saw her again here, she was terrified it would all come out. Eleanor Prouse must have stumbled upon it. Lila panicked, and now—" He spread his hands helplessly. "Now they're both dead." Agatha's anger deflated into something that felt uncomfortably like pity. "You realize this makes you accessory to a 20-year-old crime?" "Indeed, and perhaps to 2 deaths, if guilt counts for anything." "It usually does in Carsely," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You'll tell Bill?" "Eventually, but not tonight. I'll let you keep your illusions till morning." He nodded, gratitude flickering in tired eyes. "You're kinder than you pretend, Mrs. Raisin." "Don't spread it about. I've a reputation to maintain." Outside, the drizzle had thickened into proper rain. Agatha walked home through puddled lanes, her coat heavy, her thoughts heavier. She'd wanted truth, and now she had it. An ugly one. Mrs. Bloxby, of all people, had once lied for love. Agatha couldn't decide whether to admire her or slap her. At home, Hodge greeted her with his usual feline indifference. She poured a gin, lit a cigarette, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "So, Reverend Love and Lady Conscience protect a thief, 2 women die, and I'm the meddler," she said to Hodge. He blinked slowly, unimpressed. "You're right," she muttered. "We're all hypocrites, except you." The cat stretched luxuriously, unconcerned with moral nuance. Agatha smiled faintly. "If only the world were as simple as you, my lad." She took another sip of gin, the rain tapping steady rhythm against the windows, and wondered which was worse, lies told for love or truths told too late. Carsely was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that suggested the village itself was eavesdropping. Even the drizzle seemed subdued, misting the hedgerows with a kind of reverence. Agatha Raisin, staring moodily into her 3rd cup of coffee, felt it like a reproach. It had been 2 days since the vicar's confession, 2 days since Lila Venn's death was officially labelled suspicious, and 2 days since Mrs. Bloxby had vanished from view again. Hodge sat on the kitchen table, tail tucked neatly, watching her as though judging her housekeeping and moral compass in equal measure. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha muttered. "I've done my bit. If the vicar's wife wants to live like a ghost, that's her affair." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. He knew his human too well. Agatha lit a cigarette, exhaled, and scowled at the smoke detector. She was restless, the kind of restlessness that always led to either an argument or an investigation, preferably both. She tried to distract herself by flicking through yesterday's Evesham Echo. There it was again. Local woman's death still a mystery. Beneath it, a grainy photo of the barn, blurred by mist and curiosity. The article made no mention of Mrs. Bloxby or the vicar. Not yet. But the village rumour mill was faster than Fleet Street. The phone rang. She snatched it up. "Bill Wong," came the steady voice. "About time you called. You've been avoiding me." "I've been working," he said, "and you've been meddling." "Semantics. What's the latest?" A pause. "You were right. It wasn't suicide. Toxicology found traces of digitalis in Lila's system, same as Eleanor Prouse. The quantities differ. Too small to be instant. Whoever gave it to her was aiming to frighten, not kill. So, an accidental death. Or panic. The evidence fits someone trying to stage a suicide after things got out of hand. Someone like Mrs. Bloxby." He hesitated. "We can't speculate. You just did. Agatha, listen to me. There's more here than meets the eye. You can help her best by keeping quiet for once." "Me? Quiet?" "Miracles happen," said Bill, and hung up. Agatha glared at the receiver. Silence might be holy, but it wasn't in her nature. By mid-afternoon, she found herself at the vicarage gate, propelled less by reason than by stubborn concern. The garden looked neglected, roses drooping like penitents. She rang the bell twice before the door opened. Mrs. Bloxby stood there, pale and calm, as though expecting her. "Agatha," she said softly. I wondered how long it would take. "I brought you something," said Agatha, holding out a paper bag. "Cinnamon buns. They're terrible, but the gesture's decent." A faint smile. "You'd better come in." The vicarage parlour smelled faintly of lavender polish and cold tea. The fire hadn't been lit. Mrs. Bloxby gestured to a chair but remained standing, her hands clasped. "I suppose you know everything now," she said quietly. "Not quite. I've got bits, and a few wild guesses that usually turn out to be right." "Then allow me to save you the trouble." Agatha froze as Mrs. Bloxby crossed to the writing desk and opened a small drawer. She withdrew a folded letter, cream paper, handwriting neat as scripture. "I've written this for Bill Wong," she said. "It will explain what happened. My husband knows, of course. He wanted to take the blame, but I couldn't allow it." Agatha's throat tightened. "You don't have to do this." "I do. The truth is like confession. It burns until spoken." "Then speak it to me first," said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby hesitated, then nodded. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. 20 years ago, at the Battersea Mission, I was young and foolish. Lila and I worked together. She was charming, people like her always are, and she persuaded me to sign some documents I barely understood. I thought they were transfers between accounts. They weren't. She was stealing money. When it was discovered, I took the blame." Agatha stared. "You... what?" "I couldn't bear the thought of scandal. The mission would have collapsed. The vicar, he wasn't my husband then, would have lost his post. So I confessed to an accounting error. I resigned. Lila disappeared. And when she turned up here? It was as if the past had walked back through the door. I begged her to leave before anyone found out. She laughed. She said I owed her for keeping quiet all these years." "So she was blackmailing you?" Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "Yes, but it wasn't just money. She wanted legitimacy, to be introduced in Carsely as a friend, to be part of the parish. And then, poor Eleanor Prouse learned something. She called me the day before the auction, hinting she knew about London. I panicked. I told Lila. She said she'd handle it." Agatha's eyes widened. "And Eleanor was dead the next day." "Yes. When I realized what she'd done, I confronted her. She swore it had been an accident, that she'd meant to frighten Eleanor, not kill her. I told her I'd go to the police." "And she attacked you?" Mrs. Bloxby's voice trembled. She tried to snatch the letter I'd written her, proof of her blackmail. We struggled. She fell against the car door. I heard her head strike it. She didn't move. Agatha stared at her, speechless for once. "I thought she was dead," Mrs. Bloxby whispered. "When my husband came home, I told him everything. He said we'd make it look like suicide, that she'd already done it once before after Battersea. He said no one would believe the truth. I let him. I was so tired of lying." For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking like a polite judge. "Bill knows?" Agatha asked finally. "He suspects. I'm giving him this letter tomorrow." Agatha reached for her hand. "Margaret, if you tell them, it'll ruin you." "Perhaps," she said, "but hiding it has ruined me already." Later that night, Agatha sat at her kitchen table, a cigarette burning itself into ash as she thought. The drizzle had thickened into a proper rain, drumming against the window panes like conscience. Charles phoned, of course, with the timing of a man who sensed drama. "Well, darling, the village is positively vibrating. I hear our saintly vicar's wife is on the verge of confession. Do tell me she's not turning herself in." "She is." "Good Lord, why? Everyone adores her." "Because she's incapable of deceit, even when it would save her." "Unlike you." "Exactly," he chuckled. "There's hope for you yet." "Don't be daft." She hung up, irritated by how right he sounded. The next morning, Agatha walked to the vicarage with a strange heaviness. The mist had lifted, leaving the village too clear, too honest. Bill's car was already outside. Inside, Mrs. Bloxby sat composed, the letter in her hands. Bill stood beside her, grave but kind. "You needn't stay, Agatha," he said gently. "I'll stay," she replied. Mrs. Bloxby handed him the envelope. "This will clear my husband. I'll tell the rest myself." "You're a brave woman," Bill said quietly. "No," she answered. "Just one who's finished being afraid." Agatha watched, throat tight, as Mrs. Bloxby rose, straightened her cardigan, and walked out with Bill. Her poise was heartbreaking. When the door closed, the vicar turned to Agatha. His face was pale but peaceful. "You'll forgive me, Mrs. Raisin. I once prayed you'd stop meddling in our affairs. Now I see you were heaven's rougher instrument." "Don't give me credit," she said briskly. "I've meddled for worse reasons." "You've saved her soul. Souls are above my pay grade. I just hate unanswered questions." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps they're the same thing." That evening, Carsely exhaled. The rumours died down, replaced by quiet sympathy. Mrs. Bloxby was not charged. The coroner accepted Bill's version of events: self-defence, panic, and the vicar's misguided loyalty. The gossip softened into pity, and the parish carried on. Agatha poured herself a gin and looked out over her garden. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air clean and faintly sweet. She felt oddly bereft. Hodge jumped onto her lap, heavy and reassuring. "You see, Hodge," she murmured, "truth always wins in the end, but it's a miserable sort of victory." He meowed, unimpressed. She stroked him absently. "If I'd held my tongue, she might still be at the WI bake sale fussing over jam jars. Instead, she's writing statements for the police. Perhaps silence is the greater virtue." Hodge purred, unconcerned with philosophy. "You're right," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Virtue's overrated anyway." Smoke curled through the room, soft as resignation. Outside, a church bell chimed the hour, measured, forgiving, as if marking not an ending, but an understanding. Agatha leaned back, a wry smile tugging her lips. "Well, my dear Hodge, Carsely's peace is restored. Until the next scandal, and between you and me, I rather hope it isn't too far off." The cat yawned, stretched luxuriously, and turned his back on morality. Agatha laughed softly, the sound small but real, and reached for her gin. "Here's to the sin of silence," she said, raising the glass. "May I never suffer it for long." The clock ticked, the house settled, and outside the drizzle returned, gentle, persistent, and very English. Carsely had the look of a village trying to forget itself. Weeks had passed since the scandal, yet its lanes still held the hush of people speaking softly about something everyone already knew. The drizzle had turned to cold mist, the hedgerows rhymed with frost, and smoke rose from chimneys like sighs too polite to be audible. Agatha Raisin, in a fur-trimmed coat that made her look faintly continental and wholly out of place, trudged up the vicarage path clutching a tin of shortbread and a cat-carrier. Hodge yowled once in protest. He detested outings, but she had insisted on bringing him. He was moral support, though he didn't know it. Mrs. Bloxby opened the door before she could knock. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed but peaceful. The vicar was gone, quietly reassigned to a parish in Devon. The vicarage felt oddly spacious without him, as though silence itself had moved in and was paying rent. "Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby gently, "you didn't have to come." "Nonsense. Thought I'd check you hadn't joined a convent." "Not quite yet," said Mrs. Bloxby, with a smile faint enough to be brave. "And is that Hodge?" "Yes. He insisted on calling, though he finds the clergy unsettling." Mrs. Bloxby bent to peer into the carrier. "He's grown." "Fatter, you mean? He shares my vices. Too much comfort, too little humility." "Then we're all alike," she murmured, ushering her in. The sitting room was warm, scented faintly of beeswax and wood smoke. On the mantel the clock ticked with reassuring propriety. Agatha set down the tin and fussed with her gloves longer than necessary. "Shortbread," she said briskly. "Doris swore by the recipe, though I've my doubts she measured anything." "It's kind of you," Mrs. Bloxby said, taking the tin. "Kindness is overrated," said Agatha. "I was in Evesham anyway." "Of course," said Mrs. Bloxby, who knew a lie when she heard one. They sat. Hodge was released and immediately took possession of the hearthrug, stretching as though he owned both the vicarage and its moral equilibrium. "How are you managing?" Agatha asked, avoiding eye contact. "Each day feels a little less like penance," Mrs. Bloxby replied. "The parish has been generous. People forgive more easily than I expected." "They always do when there's gossip involved," said Agatha. "It keeps them entertained." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I've found comfort in honesty, even the painful kind." Agatha made a small noise somewhere between a scoff and a sigh. "Yes, well, honesty doesn't suit everyone. Makes the face go pinched." "You did the right thing," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "You saw through everything, even when I wanted you to stop looking." "You make it sound noble. It wasn't. I was just nosy." "No," Mrs. Bloxby said, her gaze kind. "You understood what silence costs." Agatha bristled as though kindness were an accusation. "I did it for the truth. That's all." "Then the truth has a better champion than it deserves." Agatha coughed, uncomfortable. "Anyway, Bill says it's all settled. You won't face charges." "Bill was very gentle," Mrs. Bloxby said. "He told me the law is one thing, but conscience is another." "Bill's too decent for police work. He'll never make inspector if he keeps being humane." "Perhaps that's what makes him good at it," said Mrs. Bloxby. I prefer results." "You always get them." Agatha frowned. "Not always. Some of them come with consequences I don't fancy repeating." They sat in companionable quiet for a moment, the kettle humming in the background. Hodge began to purr, a soft engine of contentment. "He seems at peace," said Mrs. Bloxby. "That's because he's immoral," said Agatha. "He'd sleep through Judgment Day if the fire was warm enough." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly, the first genuine laugh Agatha had heard from her in weeks. "It's good to hear that again," Agatha said. "It's good to be reminded there's still humour left in the world," Mrs. Bloxby replied. Agatha rose, brushing imaginary lint from her coat. "Well, I won't keep you. You probably have church things." "You could stay for tea," said Mrs. Bloxby, though without insistence. "No, thank you. I've been waiting, and I prefer my confessions private." "Then let me at least walk you out." They stepped into the chill dusk. Carsely lay hushed under a thin layer of snow, the first of the year, dusting rooftops and ivy alike. Smoke curled from chimneys. Somewhere a dog barked, declaring the world safe again. Mrs. Bloxby touched Agatha's arm. "You know, I couldn't have faced any of this without you." Agatha blinked. "You'd have managed. You're annoyingly resilient." "Still, I'm grateful. Truly." "Don't go sentimental on me, Margaret. You'll ruin my reputation." Mrs. Bloxby smiled, eyes glistening faintly in the dim light. "Take care of yourself, Agatha." "Someone has to," Agatha said briskly. "Heaven knows no one else will." She picked up Hodge's carrier and turned down the path, boots crunching on the frosted gravel. Behind her, the vicarage window glowed softly, a square of light against the early dark. For a moment she paused, watching snow settle on the hedgerows. The quiet had that curious Carsely quality. Peaceful, yes, but edged with mischief, as though the village itself knew its calm would never last. "We all have our secrets, don't we, darling?" she said to Hodge. The cat meowed once, dignified, as though agreeing to nothing. Back home the cottage was warm, welcoming, and faintly smoky from a neglected log in the grate. Agatha kicked off her boots, poured a gin and tonic, and collapsed into the armchair. Hodge leapt gracefully onto her lap, circled twice, and settled with a sigh. "You're heavy," she grumbled. "Too many tins of salmon." He purred louder. She reached for her cigarettes, lighting one with the ease of long practice. The first inhale steadied her nerves, the second made her smile. "You know, Hodge," she said, exhaling a slow curl of smoke, "I sometimes think the whole village would fall apart without me." He blinked sleepily. "All right," she amended, "perhaps just collapse more interestingly." The Red Lion clock chimed 6, its faint peal floating across the green. Somewhere Doris was probably serving tea, Bill was writing up his report, and Mrs. Bloxby was saying her evening prayers. Carsely, for all its sins, was itself again. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, replaced it immediately, and smiled into the firelight. "Peace restored," she murmured. "How perfectly dull." Hodge stretched, one paw pressing against her arm like punctuation. "Don't worry," she told him softly. "Give it a fortnight. Something wicked, or at least wonderfully stupid, will happen soon enough." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and Carsely slept beneath its quilt of small secrets. Agatha raised her glass in silent toast. "To friendship," she said, "and to knowing when not to speak." Hodge purred in answer, his eyes half closed, his loyalty unquestioning and purely self-interested. Agatha laughed under her breath. A friend in the shadows indeed. Outside, the snow continued its quiet work, covering every footprint, softening every sharp truth, until morning, when life would begin again.